Good. Okay, so welcome to the Sustainable Times Investor Founder podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to be joined by Manshu and the CEO of Hutan Bio, and obviously the founder, John. Oh, I could have but co-founder. Thank you for correcting me, John. And Hutan Bio, they're building a low carbon biofuel platform using a microalgae grown in automated bioreactors, turning sunlight and captured CO2 into a drop-in quality fuel for sectors like aviation, shipping, where of course electrification is the hardest. So in the next 25 minutes, we'll obviously break down the tech into plain English, what's really changed the market to make algae viable solution, and of course the commercial and fundraising journey ahead. So welcome, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So could you explain Hutan Bio in 12 words?
Hutan Bio is a radically new platform for creating cost parity drop-in fuels. Takes through algae.
Okay. And, what is it? What do you guys actually do? And, what does it actually replace?
Sure. So we become an alternative to crude oil. So the feedstock that creates those finished fuels, we can be an alternative to that, a sustainable alternative to that. And then and really importantly, we can kind of get into this later, but a scalable, sustainable alternative, which so far has not been possible. So you look at transportation, and we see EVs ever increasing on a daily basis. More and more people are doing that, and eventually petrol cars will be phased out. But for planes, for ships, even for heavy trucks, there really isn't any alternative to liquid fuels, because liquid fuels have 60 times the energy density of batteries. Batteries aren't, in our lifetimes, and probably in another lifetime after that, going to become anywhere near as energy dense. They've only doubled in energy density over the last decade. We really have 20, 30 years to be able to make a massive impact, a dent in decarbonization, if we're going to stop, chaos that's going to ensue, which we all know about. So what are the options for decarbonizing heavy transportation? There's waste. There's where you use, say, something like used cooking oil. There's tallow and kind of animal fats, but those are really limited in quantity. Then you've got the alternatives like corn ethanol, bio-based crops, palm oil, and we know all about the problems with them. They take away arable land, push up the prices of corn, and as a result, they're not very green or sustainable. So it's really hard to find a scalable solution to this really important problem. And the way, and you've got to make it cost effective. So the latest generation that have been talked about are these electrofuels where you get CO2 from the air and you get hydrogen, electrolytic hydrogen, green hydrogen, and you put them together. But it's a really costly solution. So we think we've got a solution to this by making not just a green and scalable alternative, but also one that can be at cost parity. So you're not going to pay more for your flights when you take that trip to Hawaii or wherever. You're going to pay the same amount because the fuel cost has not changed.
And would you say that the wedge then, what is the key wedge? Would you say it's how you're producing the fuel using algae, and of course using waste or corn, you're saying is going to be much more expensive, and obviously it takes up agricultural land and things like that. And what would you say to be true for a customer to switch? I mean, what is the key wedge here? I mean, what's the cost comparative to normal traditional petrochemical fuels?
Sure. So the difference is that we are using an algae platform. Algae's always been the great green hope for biofuels, because it doesn't use arable land, it doesn't use fresh water, you can use seawater, and it only needs CO2 and fertilizer to grow. So it can take away some of the polluting CO2 that comes from power plants, etc. Right? However, the reality has been very different. There's always been crashes of culture. There's always been issues with the quality of oil. There's always been problems with costs. So what John and his team have done is discover a new species of algae, done in a very methodical way. They wanted to find the best type of vehicle for creating fuel. Knowing that all these problems with algae fuel exist, how do you overcome that? So they started from scratch, said, look, we need this and this and this. Let's see if an organism exists out there in the natural world to find it. And perhaps I could hand over to
There's a nice transition into actually the filming story, John. I mean, how did this all come about, and why are you confident that algae could be the solution?
I was asked this very question by an investor about an hour and a half ago. The issue is that the original, remember, all oil, and fossil oil comes from algae. Okay, that's where it comes from. And it goes through a geological process that turns it into crude oil, black oil in the ground, and gas as well. Now, that process takes thousands and thousands of years. Our process takes 35 days, right? It grows on seawater. It grows in the deserts. It doesn't use arable land. It doesn't use fresh water in cultivation. Because when we set out, we said, if you were going to use algae to make fuel, and remember, 13 million barrels a day are coming out of Saudi Arabia, 13 from the US, 12 now from Saudi. Million barrels a day, right? It puts our production here in the North Sea into the margins. But that we're using roughly 100 million barrels of oil a day. So any system that you are going to propose to wean the world off its fossil fuel addiction, and when you think about it, we use fossil fuels, ships carrying food. Fastest growing vessel class is bulk carriers. In addition to fast fashion and iPhones and all the other things that we love, 95% of everything comes from somewhere by ship. Airplanes, the same deal. Lorries, you can have small electric vehicles, and we have them already, but you are not going to be hauling large volumes, large heavy stuff with a battery. So you have to be scalable. So the real question is, the constraint is an organism that grows just like an agricultural organism. 10,000 years ago, we worked out how to grow wheat. Almost certainly it wasn't a man, it was probably a woman. And screening all of the plants all around wheat. What happens with wheat? You grow it, throw it in the ground, up it pops again. It's not an orchid. You try growing orchids like that, you'll never get any. So it has to grow and give a yield, and it mustn't mess about, right? And it must resist all of these nasty things. We put that thinking into a constraint. And then the real big step, there's the three of us, myself, Dr. Noor Asli Mokhtar, a lady from Malaysia who got to Cambridge on scholarships, bright as a button. Ms. Sohaiza Ahmed Janhor, another lady from Malaysia, got to Cambridge on scholarships, bright as a button. Me, I'm just, I was there by chance. We took a constraint base. If you're going to do this, you have to be scalable. You have to grow at high temperature. You have to be able to need CO2. You have to not die. You have to not require special stuff to grow. And the oil you make better be as close as, damn it, to diesel. In other words, C16, C18. Many algae make things that are out in the hundreds and 20s, and you have to crack them. Our issue was we wanted to make the oil that fitted straight into the existing infrastructure. Nobody is going to say, oh, no, we need sustainable fuel. We can't use, the existing fuel system. Yeah. Safety, operations, storage, you have to be the same thing. So what we've done is we found in a very huge bioprospecting survey that killed 1.2 trillion organisms to find Sphaerica. Sphaerica evolved billions of years ago when the world was much rougher. And that's the organism we have. And that organism simply grows where we ask it to and produces oil where we asked it to. And it grows more effectively than any other oil crop on the planet. So it's 10 times more effective than palm oil.
Wow. And what historically has been the bottleneck in algae? What's changed in recent years to make this a viable solution?
So it was literally the activation energy of a large, long-range, vast bioprospecting survey. Typical strains that were being used were from universities. And I'm an ex-university person. Imagine you're a new student, you come in my lab and I say, well, go and find an algae and you can study that. And you think, okay, well, my degree is 3 years long. It's going to take me no more than 6 weeks to find something, because by then I'm worried I won't finish my degree. And literally, they don't look. We spent years and years and years homing our mechanisms for not only finding, but also selecting for. And then we did some engineering, basically traditional genetics, to make the cells very, very salt tolerant, which means we don't have to add fresh water. When you're growing things in a bioreactor, the heat makes the water boil. We use a video of steam coming out the top of us. That's how hot they get. And that means that the water, seawater, becomes more salty. And eventually, it's really, really salty and things don't like that. We engineered it that our organism can take PSU 55, which is the Dead Sea. Okay, so the Dead Sea is called the Dead Sea for a very good reason. It's too salty for most things.
Sure.
So we took engineering constraints, we had long-range funding, and we then applied it. When we started, we had no idea of success. Absolutely nice. It was rather messianic.
That's really interesting. We'll come on to the fundraising piece in a second. But Manshu, what convinced you that this technology is ready for commercial scale for you to get on both?
Sure. So I've got a long history in algae. I've worked for the 2 largest algae projects to date. I helped run lead the algae project for the Omani National Oil Company. So I've seen all of the issues that algae has had and why it hasn't commercialized in the 20 or so years that people have been spending serious time and money on. And those boil down to a few things. One is that it's very hard to get algae to grow consistently at the optimal amounts that you, on paper, think it will grow at. And that's because algae are these really energy-rich organisms. All these marine critters in the seawater want to eat it. So these algae, it's really hard for them, the cultures, not to crash. That would dramatically reduce productivity. Secondly, there's also contamination that has the same effect. Thirdly, the oil is spread across the algae cell. It's very hard for it to be extracted. And what is extracted is often a mess. So it's really hard to clean that out. So for all of these reasons, the actual costs of getting a finished product that you can send to a refinery to then make fuels was really high. And those costs were stubbornly high. And it goes back to what John was talking about, that because you were looking, first of all, you were looking at this limited collection of about a dozen or so different algae species, chlorella, Nelacropsis, Ganoiella, there's a bunch of those, right? So John's taken a very different approach. So look, those are limited. Those have all got these issues. Let's start afresh and say, okay, what do we need this organism to do? Let's see if we can find an organism that matches that criteria. And then with this discovery that organism does exist, that's what we've now built the platform on. And that's what made me so excited, because having seen all these train wrecks in the past with algae, and sorry, I'll change between algae and algae. The Americans say algae and Brits say algae, so I'm kind of confused. I'm in the middle, so apologies if I had to change around. But that's what really got me excited, was that here is a feasible solution for algae to actually work, because it's taken a very different approach and it's overcome those problems that were there in the past.
And talk me about talk about the platform and practically how it actually works then. So you're effectively growing algae in a controlled environment, and then do you take the algae and then ship it out to a refinery? So what's the flow of end to end? What's the inputs and outputs?
So it's not a controlled environment. That's the point.
Right.
Okay, what we do is we grow it in deserts. Okay, so why? Because the photon flux between plus 40 north and plus 40 south is the highest on the planet. It's up to about 1,090. In the northern end, it's about 1,090 the micromoles photons per second per meter squared for those who care. Put it this way, incredibly bright sunlight, and at the equator it's 2,000. We wanted an organism that could use all of that free energy, right? So we grow it in deserts, and all the deserts are in that zone, and we grow them. The other half of the technology of the company is the engineering. And so what we had is a really brilliant team of Cambridge engineers, starting with someone from the Cavendish, who modeled how our cells would move when a bubble went past them. Okay, so we had lots of filming of bubbles and cells and so on. And what that made is, it's a thing called mass transfer. Literally, if you're cooking, if you're trying to cook something, you want to get it going, you have to stir it, right? You've got to get the material you're cooking to get hot. Now, that is a mass transfer effect. What we want to do is get CO2 into the cell, expose the cells to light, and get the oxygen out. Oxygen's a pollutant. Okay, it stops photosynthesis. So we have designed from scratch, tailor-made to the organism, Sphaerica, photobioreactors that provide us with 6% photosynthetic efficiency. What does that mean? Put it into context. The theoretical maximum, so by physicists, is 9% for photosynthesis. The highest ever seen in a laboratory is nearly 7%. We're in at 6% at volume. So we have really cracked how do you get efficiency and still have volume. And the answer is a very clever and very, very elegant engineering solution. So we grow the cells.
Does that mean that the economics
it makes a huge, yes. So in the US, the benchmark that they never achieved, and I can pass to my learner friend here, who was, you see, he and I were in different regiments. He was on the American side fighting his war when we were beginning our one. And it turns out that, well, we're still going. So, but all right, you gotta leave it out. But they basically wanted to get 30 grams growth per day per meter squared, a kind of aerial production. Like if you had acres, how many tons of wheat does a farm produce per acre? Using that technology, that approach, they aimed for 30. They never got more than 4 to 6, and then it would crash. We are presently at 49. Okay, so it's a step function. Now, to put you through the whole process, we inoculate seawater. We put in CO2. The CO2 can be just from the air. It can be from a polluting site. It can be dirty, which is a big difference. E-fuels, you have to have absolutely pure CO2. If an e-fuel system sees even a little bit of dust, it knocks their catalyst down, and over a while the whole thing crashes. We don't have to put in very much energy because the sun provides all the energy we need. The organisms carry out their job. They take sunlight, they turn it into energy, electrical power. They use that to make chemical energy, use that to then stick carbons together. All right? And the cells grow. And then at a certain point, we introduce an environmental shock that makes them store oil, sort of like bears getting ready to go to sleep. They hibernate and so forth. And in that condition, then we accumulate the oil. And then we harvest the cells by literally straining them with an incredibly advanced tea strainer. And then we have a whole downstream process, and it produces three things. One, we absorb 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of biomass we produce or oil we produce. So we actually suck CO2 out of the air. The material we then produce is the bio oil, which is a C16, C18 triglyceride, and a high protein, 30 to 40% protein feed for prawns and fishes and so on. And when you think about the desert, one of the things deserts don't have is water and protein. But people live there and they would rather like to have some protein for the children. Sure, So what we've got is a technology that for the first time is deployable in areas that we haven't had anything. We make our fuel at a scalable means because it is efficient. And we don't touch food production, and we don't touch fresh water in our production of biomass. That's huge, because the next shortage is going to be water, and the one after that is going to be protein. The one we've got now is energy.
And what would you say, or whereabouts are you in your commercialization journey? I mean, what's the hardest to control when you start to scale, and where are you in that process?
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that. So we're in the early stages of scale up. So far we've got a pilot in Malaysia, which has been able to show that we can cultivate this, we can process the oil. Now we want to put everything together in the environment which we think is going to be the most optimal for growing this at scale, which is the coastal desert. So we're going to the Middle East. It's going to be Oman specifically, where we're looking to grow a first, what we call a commercial demo, which will be a 1 hectare site. It'll be integrated upstream, so cultivation, as well as the downstream processing. And that will be a modular unit, which then we can scale through to about 100 kilometers squared, right? And that'll be a commercial unit. Our first of a kind size will be about 1 kilometer squared, and that will be the point at which we'll be able to commercially sell a product that will be at the right prices to actually make us a profit. However, it will only be once we get to the next stage at 100 kilometers squared, where this will now be a substantial margin being created and good return on capital.
And with 1 hectare, how many liters of fuel are you producing from that? And is it a bio oil that then needs to be refined to meet jet fuel, diesel standards?
Yeah, so it'll be about 50 tons of oil with 1 hectare will create. It's a small amount because this is just a commercial demo.
Yeah.
It'll be a bio oil that will be like a equivalent of a vegetable oil. So you could put it directly into a biorefinery to either make biodiesel, or you could hydro-treat it to be able to make those finished fuels such as jet fuel, marine fuel, etc.
And over the next 12 months, then what's sort of the biggest sort of technical risk? What's the sort of key challenges that you have coming up? Would you say in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start perhaps on the commercial side. Yeah, John can take on the kind of technical side. So on the commercial side, we are finalizing what that 1 hectare commercial demo will look like, exactly what the location will be, all the specifics around that, make that real, as well as work with refining partners to prove out the spec of the oil, that it can be utilized by them, really get it to the point of like, right, we've got now a finished product for you then to kind of take on board. And then for the technical side,
so we've got already and we filed patents on these, so I can stretch a little bit.
Sure.
Your problem in the desert, your problem for us in the scale. Now, 100 square kilometers sounds a lot, but it's actually only 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. There are sheep farms in Australia that are measured in the thousands of square kilometers. And in the desert kingdoms in the Middle East, for instance, Oman has 1 million square miles of land set aside for this kind of purpose. Okay. Everybody in the oil business knows that the end is nigh for burning oil. Nobody wants to really burn oil because it's terrible waste. It's much better to turn that oil into things like surgical gowns, medical equipment, recyclable plastic components for electric cars. And when you do that, you don't need to have 100 million barrels a day. You go way, way down if you had something better to burn. We don't take thousands of years to make oil. We take 35 days. So we offer the capability to actually grow your oil. And in terms of investment, we're a fraction of the investment you need in an oil well. So we can offer a scalable answer. Where we're looking on our technical development now is literally aspects of the downstream processing, where we're literally building systems, machines that are, instead of taking a general, would you believe, you got a Kenwood mixer, it'll mix most things, right? But if all you were mixing was something, you could make the mixer absolutely perfect for that, right? So that's where we are there. We're looking at sort of bespoke instrumentation. And the other area is looking at automation of building the farm. Now, it turns out, bless us, because our engineers are incredible, they've taken the view not to use anything that isn't available, right? There's no new stuff yet. What we're doing is repurposing, pretty frequently, agricultural things. And there are agricultural farms, or there are farms, fruit farms, where they have these posts, and the posts are all set up. You can make them like Jeremy, what's his name, was doing, by hand. It's quite tough, but there are actually machines that do it much better. And you just load the machine with the vertical pieces and pop. And that's our next stage, because you want to be able, it's a desert, for God's sake, you don't want to be hanging out there all day. So it's going to be looking at robotic systems. We've got LoRaWAN, which is the Internet of Things. They're very slow speed Wi-Fi that can go for miles, that controls our system. So the farms will actually be automated. The people working in it will not be PhDs and engineers. They'll be normal people with normal jobs. And their task is to go out and, fix the occasional thing that's not working and oversee the operations. So we're building that.
And what would you say the cost comparison is from an OPEX, from a sort of the OPEX and a CAPEX perspective? So if you're spinning up on these farms compared to an oil refinery or an oil site, or looking at the OPEX, and what's the cost comparison compared to?
I know some figures.
Sure. So the fully levelized cost, so looking at both the CAPEX and OPEX, will lead us to be about cost parity. Obviously, a lot of that depends upon getting those economies of scale. If we go larger sizes, then we'll hit that cost parity. So we're looking at about 100 kilometers square, so 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers, to be at that cost parity situation. In terms of the kind of split, it's I won't give you the exact figures, but it's similar to each other, like the total capex versus the opex on a annual basis, a annualized basis.
Sure, that makes sense. And so going on to your strategy in the scale up, and you mentioned SAF, such sustainable aviation fuel, maritime. Why have you decided to go into that particular market, or are you sort of working with the refineries and your companies to decide where that actually goes, or is there a particular strategy to target that particular market?
Yes, it's very much about working the refineries. They're the ones who will ultimately be selling the final fuels. So what we want is to be an input into those refineries. The actual final destination isn't really relevant to us. What we're trying to do is replace those crude oils, those polluting feedstocks that are eventually then being refined into finished fuels. By having a cleaner feedstock, those finished fuels will be clean fuels.
And who's your customer then? Is it governments? Is it the oil companies? what's your business model, commercial model? Is it a license? Is it to own and operate these facilities?
Sure. So initially, there's no way of licensing it until you've actually shown that this works. This is a very different type of process, both in terms of the upstream, so the cultivation. It's very different to aquaculture. It's very different to agriculture. Very different to oil production. So we're going to have to do that ourselves. Even on the downstream processing, it's a particularly unique mix of things that no other industry currently does. So we're going to have to show that the whole thing works on cells, not just at small scale, but also at a large scale. Before you can license this technology, you'll have to show that it works on a large scale. So the idea is that we'll first of all show that this works on a large scale. We'll have to put this all together, learn from it, understand how it works, remove the operational risks, make it bankable, make it project financeable. At that point, then we can say, okay, now this technology is ready to license.
Yeah.
And we can then retract back into what we think is our major competitive advantage, which is on the biology side. We can slowly retract and say, look, we will, kind of like what Monsanto does, right? Monsanto doesn't do all the farming. It can do all the farming, but what it does, it focuses on the biology and sends out the seed to farmers. So once we've established how to do the farming, algae farming, we can retract back into the seed manufacture, and the farming can be done by others that learn about how to do it. We'll show them, but they can then take that over and run with it. And we can go back to where our brains are best, which is in the own biology.
So you eventually get to licensing,
Exactly.
essentially. But you've got to demonstrate the commercial viability, prove the concept, and then you'll be able to...
Exactly. We'll do one plant, and that plant eventually will probably also eventually be sold off.
Yeah, sure.
But we'll build that one plant, and then we'll focus upon licensing. We don't need to build any further plants out now.
And you could imagine that, at the big scale, not the other kilometer scale, but the further scale, you might have potentially things like Schlumberger coming along and saying, oh, geez, maybe we should start to get involved in this. So, the oil industry is full of incredibly high-tech companies. And I'd be very surprised if they didn't start to come into us at the top end, because that's always been their model.
And talk to me about your fundraising journey and the funding that you've raised today. So when was you first established?
We started in 2019.
Yeah.
Myself, Asmin, and Dada, Suhaida. And the reason we started, we're scientists. We really are blinky scientific classes in Africa. And we're really mostly happy in the lab. But this organism that came out, we were stunned by its capabilities.
Was this at Cambridge?
This was at Cast, and where we began to see it.
King of the universities to bring Saudi
The strains we got now come from Asia, and they're similar to the ones at Cast, not quite the same. But what it said was our pipeline was finding these very, very clever strays. And when we got it, it was so amazing that we felt we had to commercialize it. So 3 scientists with not the first clue in the world had formed a company, a company in Malaysia and a company in England called Hutan Bio. We had a very nice accountants called NSORs, if I'm allowed to say. They're very good, no-nonsense fellows. They helped us. And we had it all set up and running. We had the lab going. And then we had lockdown. Ouch. But we had an amazing team then, founding team. We kept everybody on full salary.
And did you raise a pre-seeds?
Then we paid for the pre-seed ourselves.
Okay.
So that it came out of our back pockets. Basically, we spent all the money we had. And it sounds crazy, but from a scientific perspective, if I show another side, oh, good God, yeah, all right, yeah, totally. It's a question about whether you think it's a risk or not. For us, we could see that it did what it should do on the side of the tin. And so it wasn't for us a risk because we knew nothing about finance, and people from finance, we assumed that they were driven by science.
And how has that process been, though, to demonstrate to investors the science behind what you're doing? Was it easy to communicate? Did it take time, to build that confidence with investors?
I think we were greatly helped by our first CEO, Paul Beestor. Sadly, he had to retire from the company for health reasons, but he turned us from Charlie Farley scientists into an investable organization and brought in our first pre-seed funder. Okay, so we had a chap. Are we allowed to say who does it?
Yeah, I think that's Brian. So it was a seed round that we had, and that was two climate-focused VCs in Clean Growth Fund, Future Planet Capital, and UK Ambition to Science.
Yeah.
So they led our Clean Growth Fund led our seed round, and Future Planet Capital came in soon after, and that's all the funding that we'd have. So we've had about nearly 4 million in funding to date. Was that recent? That was 2 years ago. Was it last year? No.
Yeah. Okay. And how did you find that process actually getting Future Planet Capital? And
if I'm going to be shocked for this, okay, so be prepared to edit this means but in academia we have one funding organization, the government. And if the government says they want pink science, well, by God, we do pink science. And if it's blue science, we do blue science. Sure. We just had one shot. What was wonderful when we entered into the world of capitalism, again, remembering the scientists never know sure what it is, it turns out that in capitalism, capital has to work. And it turns out that if you have the science, there are capital funders out there who are skilled in the art, can read the science as well as us.
I mean, it also be refreshing. Yeah, of course. It's got to be communicated in the right way, and they're going to understand it. Otherwise, they're not going to see the commercial potential. And what would you say the biggest fundraising lesson that you have had? If really, algae or deep tech, climate tech, founder, if they're listening, what would be the sort of biggest lesson that you've learned during that process?
I think early on, imagine you make a widget or some kind of website or any kind of electrical. You don't know what the market is. We know what the market is. We know what the market is, and we know what you need to get into the market because it's chemically defined. So we didn't have that problem. Our problem isn't what the market is. Our problem is, can we scale to actually address the market, which nobody asks because they can't ask that question of other technologies. And if you do the science right, the investors, there may be investors who don't do science and aren't interested. They're probably not the ones you want to work with.
I'd say that with algae and specifically, that comes with a baggage because it hasn't worked in the patents. So with investors, they become a little bit jaded by this. They don't believe the story. Well, in algae, so much has been invested. Why is it going to work now? So we've got to tackle that. Say, okay, here are the reasons. That we've got very strong reason. This is an entirely new organism that's new to science. Nobody's seen this before.
Sure.
So take them through that, make them a believer again, which is fairly easy given what we've got, and then you can kind of overcome that. Well, once bitten, twice shy. I sure have. Yeah. And so a lot of investors who have invested in algae, they would be shy to come back to the table.
Sure. So yeah, again, it's all about communicating the value in the organism that you built and developed and
improving their project. You can literally come to our site in Malaysia. We have a team of 12 scientists out there. Altogether, the company is 20. We're a tiny little company. We're tiny. Do a great deal. And we literally are making oil. You can put the oil in the diesel and have the engine run and so on and so forth. I mean, it works and you can see it.
Sure. And I think the other thing to prove is the economics, because ultimately this all boils down to economics.
Yeah.
Does the techno-economics, do they stack up? Can you actually get to below $1 per liter, right? That's the kind of the goal. You'll be able to competitive with used cooking oil? Can you get to like 40 cents a liter? We could do it with crude oil. That's what really matters. So can you show that those numbers all stack up, and can you see a path to viability? If you can, the market here is not infinite, but it's almost there. Right? These are trillion-dollar markets like talking about. But just to kind of give perhaps your listeners one visual image, if this works, then the productivity of this algae strain is such that you need an area the size of Abu Dhabi, man, in order to be able to satisfy the entire world's aviation and maritime fuel needs. So we're not talking about a large amount of land. And that land is also desert land, so of which there's plenty.
Sure. Wow, I didn't realize 39% of the planet is desert. Oh, okay, and it's not being used for anything. It doesn't get in the way of, people driving around. We use biofuel now in our cars now. S7, what else? In 10. That's coming from food. And in Britain, we don't see it, but you do see it in developing countries. When you start taking even a little bit of the sugar or carbohydrate out of the food chain, you make food for the poorest people. That bit harder to actually afford, and they don't have that much. They are literally on the absolute limit, and suddenly somebody's not having food. We should not ever pride ourselves that we're driving around on biofuel unless we know that fuel doesn't come from food.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's absolutely incredible. I think it's got huge potential, and as you said, it's been around. Algae's been around for many years, but it seems like you guys have potentially cracked it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys scale up and commercialize. And we'll just finish up on a lightning round, just to go through a couple of quick answers. What's been your biggest earliest mistake that you've made?
There's so many.
What sticks out the most, would you say?
I'm literally flooded to. What do you mean in terms of working on the strain or life in general?
No, just in the business, yeah.
Oh, okay. Life in general is full of disaster. I think that because we were a team, but put it this way, the best thing I ever did was work so closely with Aslin and Jaja, having a diverse team of really, really intelligent people. I don't make a decision on my own. It is always discussed. And I think those rare occasions, I'm sure Aslin and Jaja will punch you more than the word rare, when I make a decision on my own, it's usually a disaster. So I think my worst event is when I think of something myself.
Fair enough. And what's the best advice that you've been given?
Have a diverse team. Have more than one person look at a problem. Have engineers talk to biologists. Have physicists from the Cavendish talk to all of us. Have finance people look at our numbers. Have commercial people look at the market. You can't, a founder can sometimes be messianic. You can't. You had a wee idea.
I'd also say, just somebody else coming relatively new into this company, I think one thing that the company has done really well is make sure that it's tackling both the biology and the engineering. Yeah. So many times with these type of companies, you have either the engineering or the biology.
Right.
And as a result, we don't have a full system. You've got to have, like for reasons explained before, like you've got to have both the biology, you've got the upstream and the downstream. And I think that it's a quite a balance.
It doesn't work. The biology can be world beaten, but if you can't grow it at scale, cheaply and controlled, then it's a waste of time. And there is no, it's this or that. It's the whole package. No?
And what would you say is one myth about algae that you wish would die?
Well, it's not true. The reason algae failed in the 2000s was because algae fails. No, it's because you tried to grow strains that were from a laboratory and you tried to take them outside. And they were just like babies. They got beaten up by everybody and eaten.
Right.
So it turns out you mustn't classify every algae as the same. They're as diverse as anything else.
And just before we finish up, what do you need most right now? Is it pilots, strategic partners, talent, capital? And if one listener can open the door for you, what would it be?
So I'd say talent is definitely one thing.
Yeah.
They're always looking for the best engineers, the best biologists. That's always clear. Say also on the commercial side, we're always looking for great partners, commercial partners to work with, people that be interested in testing on oil. I say that's a really important thing for us.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your time, Manshu and John. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today, and looking forward to releasing this episode for founders, investors, and so we'll put the website links and the links to your LinkedIn and stuff in the description. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Harvey. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.